cops should protect and serve, upholding justice and safeguarding citizens. But these 9 dirty cops are the ones we need protection from. Watch as we expose their shocking betrayals in the intense courtroom drama as they face life sentences.
In the last hour, 6 former Mississippi officers were sentenced to 15 to 45 years in prison on state charges in the assault and torture of 2 black men. The officers pleaded guilty to charges including hindering prosecution, burglary, home invasion, and aggravated assault.
These 6 men, known as the Goon Squad, left many stunned with their choice of name, given their roles as law enforcement officers. The crimes they committed are so egregious and disturbing they will make your blood boil.
5 former deputies and 1 police officer entered this home, no warrant, no evidence that anything was happening there. And they proceeded to torture these men for hours using food, at one point a sex toy, and threatening an execution.
On January 24, 2023, in Mississippi, the so-called Goon Squad, comprising officers Brett McAlpin, Hunter Elward, Christian Dedman, Jeffrey Middleton, Daniel Opdyke, and Joshua Hartfield, inflicted brutal and inhumane torture on Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker for over an hour and a half. The officers, under the guise of a law enforcement operation, had responded to a report alleging that Jenkins and Parker had entered the home of Christy Wally, a childhood friend of Parker who had been paralyzed. Parker, her caretaker, was unjustly targeted. The Goon Squad forcefully broke down the front door and restrained Jenkins and Parker without a search warrant, initiating a horrific sequence of events. Wally was in the hospital when this horrific incident happened. The Goon Squad referred to Jenkins and Parker with slurs and insults while beating and torturing the men. Opdyke found an adult toy in the house and forced it into Parker's mouth. Another of the officers, Christian Dedman, threatened to the men, and he attempted until he realized that Jenkins had defecated on himself. If you thought this was all, you're wrong. Elward held the 2 men down and watched as Dedman poured cooking oil, eggs, chocolate syrup, and milk, among other kitchen ingredients, on them. Officer Joshua Hartfield also subjected Jenkins and Parker to further torment by using a taser on them while they were restrained. After nearly 2 hours of relentless torture, the officers ordered Jenkins and Parker to take a shower to conceal the evidence of their cruelty. Unfortunately for the victims, the horror was far from over. Elward forced his gun into Jenkins' mouth and fired, despite a failed initial attempt. The bullet inflicted severe damage, tearing through Jenkins' mouth, shattering his jaw, and exiting through his neck. Before fleeing the scene, the Goon Squad planted a gun and drugs in the home, falsely accusing Jenkins of having fired at them first. The Goon Squad then took the security footage from the house and discarded it in a river to destroy evidence of their crimes. They ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges, including deprivation of rights under color of law and obstruction of justice, among others. Lead attorney Malik Shabazz described the case as one of the worst he had ever encountered. The sentencing process was lengthy and overdue. Despite their guilty pleas in August 2022, the Goon Squad did not face sentencing until March 2024. As their sentences were read, the Goon Squad displayed a range of reactions. Brett McAlpin, who was considered the de facto leader or mafia don of the group, was sentenced to over 27 years in prison. His voice reportedly trembled as he addressed the court. The victims had described McAlpin as a tyrant or a king due to his commanding presence and his role in directing the other deputies during the torture. The rest of the Goon Squad acknowledged that the group would not have existed without McAlpin's leadership and influence. McAlpin offered an apology for his actions, but it was met with little consolation from the victims, who held him responsible for orchestrating the horrific events at the Braxton home. Daniel Opdyke, sentenced to 17 years in prison, broke down in tears as he addressed the court. His emotional plea included an apology for sexually assaulting Jenkins, but it was insufficient to undo the damage. Jenkins, accompanied by his aunt, chose to leave the courtroom in response to Opdyke's speech. Opdyke pleaded for sympathy by revealing that he had been sexually assaulted by his father until he was 8 years old, attributing his actions to this trauma. He was also responsible for handing over evidence from the Goon Squad's WhatsApp group chat to the police. After his apology, he was led away in chains, weeping as he exited the courtroom. Hunter Elward, who had shot Jenkins in the mouth, was sentenced to 20 years. In a tearful address, he offered a heartfelt apology to the victims for his actions, expressing remorse for shooting Jenkins and leaving him to bleed to death. Jeffrey Middleton received a sentence of 17.5 years for his role in obstructing justice and abusing the victims. Joshua Hartfield, who was sentenced to 10 years, was the only officer not affiliated with the Rankin County Sheriff's Department. His participation in the torture was attributed to his desire to join the department, where he had applied for a position. Hartfield used a taser on the victims and attempted to destroy evidence. During his sentencing, he choked back tears and wept as he apologized for failing to help those who needed him most. The man who got the longest sentencing was Christian Dedman. He was described as oppressive, sick, and the most sexually perverted of all the perpetrators for his actions. He threatened to rape the victims and poured multiple kitchen ingredients on them. Dedman was sentenced to 40 years in prison. He never addressed the victims directly, but he said that he would never forgive himself for the crimes he committed.
For, what, is given and what is done, I forgive that part, but other than that, he still did, what he did, and he has to be punished for that.
If I had to see them again, I would probably just start praying. I'd probably be scared out of my body.
While the Goon Squad lived up to their name, the same can be said about Desmond Mills and his sinister actions.
Desmond Mills pled guilty to excessive force and conspiracy to witness tampering today. He's now facing 15 years in prison. He's expected also to plead guilty to several other charges.
Desmond Mills joined the Memphis Police Department in March 2017 and quickly became part of the Scorpion Unit, a specialized predictive policing team. Scorpion, which stands for Street Crimes Operation to Restore Peace in Our Neighborhoods, was designed to utilize advanced data analysis and statistical algorithms to protect and prevent crime in targeted areas. Unlike traditional officers, the Scorpion Unit members, including Desmond Mills, operated in plain clothes and wore bulletproof vests labeled police. Their unmarked vehicles and covert operational methods allowed them to blend into their surroundings, making their presence less conspicuous to the public. This undercover approach was intended to enhance their effectiveness in identifying and addressing criminal activity discreetly. On January 7, 2023, Desmond Mills and 4 other officers from the Scorpion Unit stopped Tyree Nichols, a 29-year-old African-American FedEx worker and amateur photographer. At 8:24 p.m., just 2 minutes from his home, Tyree found himself in the midst of a harrowing encounter that would tragically alter his life. The encounter began with the officers pulling Tyree from his car and throwing him to the ground. As they tased him and issued threats, another officer further escalated the situation by deploying pepper spray into Tyree's face, intensifying his pain and confusion. Despite their efforts to subdue him, Tyree managed to break free and fled, prompting the officers to give chase. The situation escalated when the officers caught up with Tyree Nichols. What followed was a brutal and unrelenting assault. Desmond Mills, armed with his baton, delivered merciless blows to Tyree, while another officer pummeled him in the face. A third officer joined in, kicking Tyree's torso with force, causing severe injuries. Throughout this ordeal, Tyree's desperate cries for his mother pierced the night, but no one came to his aid, leaving him to endure the relentless beating alone. Paramedics arrived at the scene and Tyree was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Despite medical efforts, he succumbed to his injuries 3 days later, leaving behind a devastated family and a community grappling with shock and sorrow. Tyree's family attorney has accused the police officers of torturing Tyree to death, an allegation that has prompted the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to launch a probe into the excessive use of force during his arrest. 2 weeks after the tragic death of Tyree Nichols, on January 24, 2023, the Department of Justice and the FBI announced that they would open a civil rights investigation into the case. This decision heightened the scrutiny of the officers involved and added a layer of federal oversight to the local investigation. In the days that followed, the 5 officers implicated in Tyree's death were placed on administrative leave and subsequently fired from the Memphis Police Department. Their terminations marked the end of their careers in law enforcement. The investigations culminated in the arrest of Officer Desmond Mills and his 4 colleagues, who faced serious charges including second-degree murder, aggravated assault, kidnapping, official misconduct, and oppression. Despite the gravity of these charges, all 5 officers were granted bail and released shortly after their arrests. The Scorpion Unit, the task force to which they belonged, was disbanded in the wake of the scandal. In November 2023, Desmond Mills pleaded guilty to the state charges as part of an agreement with federal prosecutors. Desmond agreed to testify against the other 4 officers at their trials as part of the plea agreement. The prosecution recommended a 15-year sentence for Desmond. However, Desmond's sentencing hearing, originally scheduled to be held in May 2024, was postponed until November. He will be free until then. Picture this, a case so outrageous HBO couldn't resist turning it into a 6-part series. The discovery was as chilling as it was shocking. Enter Wayne Jenkins.
A judge sentenced Sergeant Wayne Jenkins to 25 years in federal prison.
You have a gun in probably, I would say 2 1/4 just by looking at it.
Inside the Baltimore Police Department, a sinister underworld was thriving. 8 police officers were found to be running an organized crime ring. Their nefarious activities orchestrated by none other than Wayne Jenkins. Wayne Jenkins, the head of the Gun Trace Task Force, wasn't your typical cop. His name became synonymous with corruption. Planting evidence was just the beginning. He masterminded robberies and even stole drugs from looted pharmaceutical companies.
Newly released videos show the officers pretending to open a safe for the first time.
Hey, Sarge! Hey, come downstairs right quick. They're about to get it open.
But in fact, prosecutors say they'd already gotten in, took $100 grand for themselves, then pretended this was the first time they'd laid eyes on the cash.
The Gun Trace Task Force was established with a noble purpose, but under Wayne Jenkins, its mission was twisted beyond recognition. Instead of upholding the law, Jenkins and his crew became the very criminals they were supposed to apprehend. Robbing people at gunpoint, stealing and selling drugs, they raked in over $1 million. But the trail of devastation they'd left didn't stop at financial gain. It included a haunting human toll. Recovered body camera footage revealed a harrowing encounter. Jenkins and his team attempting to rob 2 men in a car. The victims, desperate to escape, sped off. Jenkins pursued relentlessly, crashing into their vehicle and causing the death of Albert Davis. This reckless act not only shattered the lives of those directly involved, but also inflicted immeasurable pain on the victims' families, exposing the profound betrayal and corruption at the heart of Baltimore's police force. 7 years after the tragic incident, Davis's daughter was asked if she could ever trust the police again. Her response was poignant and revealing.
7 years later, we find out that corrupt cops who swore to protect and serve were nothing more than criminals. He apologized for it, Mr. Jenkins, but it still hurts.
But this is only part of the story. The real question is, how did years of organized crime go unnoticed within the police force? And how were they finally exposed? Surprisingly, the unraveling of this corrupt empire began with one man. His actions set off a chain of events that would eventually bring Jenkins and his crew to justice, revealing the extent of their betrayal. The turning point came with the conviction of a man who stole the that claimed a teenager's life. When the evidence was reviewed, wiretaps revealed a startling discovery. The voices of Wayne Jenkins and his 7 co-conspirators were heard repeatedly during the intercepted conversations. As investigators delved deeper, it became clear that the Gun Trace Task Force was entangled in far more than just rogue actions. They were key players in a sophisticated drug operation. It was uncovered that one of the task force members, Mamadou Gondo, had been providing protection to the drug crew, allowing them to expand their illegal enterprise into a lucrative $1 million operation. This revelation was the linchpin that exposed the depths of the corruption and criminality that had infiltrated Baltimore's police force. In addition to the damning recordings, investigators uncovered irregularities in official records, suggesting tampering. With the overwhelming evidence piling up, the FBI had enough to arrest and indict the corrupt task force members. Wayne Jenkins was finally tried and sentenced to 25 years in prison on June 7, 2018. Witnesses described him crying during his sentencing, pleading with the judge for mercy. He had confided in his attorney that he couldn't face a life sentence because of his children. His lawyer noted Jenkins showed signs of remorse, reportedly telling the judge he was ashamed of his actions. This dramatic fall from grace marked the end of one of the most notorious corruption cases in Baltimore's history, bringing some measure of justice to the victims and their families. But it's hard not to show remorse when you're caught, so we're inclined not to believe Jenkins. But in the case of Marcus Eberhardt, it's even harder to believe.
Sergeant Everard guilty on all counts and Corporal Weems guilty of involuntary manslaughter, reckless conduct, and oaths of office. Now, the 2 were accused of tasing 24-year-old Gregory Towns to death back in April of 2014.
This is Marcus Eberhardt, a former police officer from East Point, Michigan, who ignited a nationwide debate in 2014. Alongside fellow officer Howard Weems, Everard tasered 24-year-old Gregory Towns to death. On April 11, 2014, the two officers responded to a domestic violence report from Towns' girlfriend, Aisha Smith. She had called the police, alleging that Towns had abused her, prompting Everard and Weems to visit the house. According to testimony, Towns attempted to flee upon seeing the police. After being caught and handcuffed, Everard instructed Towns to walk to the patrol car. Towns, claiming he was too exhausted to walk, refused. In response, Everard and Weems used their tasers on him repeatedly until he became unresponsive. Their intention was to force Towns to comply, but their actions resulted in his death. The prosecution called the act a violation because, at the time Everard and Weems tasered Towns, he was already handcuffed and struggling to breathe. Initially, the defense argued that it wasn't the taser that caused Towns' death, but an underlying health condition, a rare sickle cell trait, that coincidentally led to his unfortunate demise. Everard was eventually charged with involuntary manslaughter and felony murder. This wasn't Everhard's first brush with controversy. Past records revealed a pattern of aggressive behavior. This case underscored the urgent need for reform in police practices and the importance of accountability in law enforcement. During the investigation, it was revealed that Everard had used the taser on Towns for more than 40 seconds, far exceeding departmental policy limits. The defense argued that Everard was unaware of Towns' health conditions and was simply following his training to subdue a resisting suspect. Despite these claims, the excessive use of the taser led to Marcus Everard being charged for Towns' death. This case marked a significant moment in Michigan's history. It was the first time a police officer had been convicted of a crime for using a taser on an individual. Everard was eventually sentenced in December 2016. During the verdict, where he was informed that he could be facing up to 15 years in prison, Everard appeared indifferent, showing no emotion or reaction. As the judge read the sentence, Everard seemed more interested in leaving the courthouse. His lawyer expressed disappointment in Everard's conduct, but offered little else in terms of defense or remorse. This lack of response from Everard further fueled public outrage and underscored the tragic impact of his actions on Gregory Towns and his family. Ultimately, Everard was sentenced to life in prison for his actions. While no recorded statements were made during the sentencing, it was reported that he released a statement expressing remorse. In his statement, Everard acknowledged the profound impact his actions had on Gregory Towns' girlfriend and child. He said, "I am truly sorry for the pain that I have caused the Marshall family. I am aware that nothing I can say or do can bring back their loved one, but I want them to know that I am taking full responsibility for my actions." This statement, while expressing remorse, did little to undo the damage and suffering caused by his excessive use of force. This case brought intense scrutiny to the use of force and aggression by police officers. For Towns' family, the conviction brought a measure of relief, knowing that Everard was held accountable for his actions. Aisha Smith, Gregory Towns' girlfriend, expressed a personal struggle with the situation. She stated that she would work to forgive herself for calling Everard and Weems to the house, despite the tragic outcome. Marcus Everard did not intend to murder Gregory, but in the next case, an officer destroyed his family's police legacy.
Official misconduct, fabricating evidence, false imprisonment, possession of controlled substances, and drug paraphernalia, and perjury. Wester joined the Jackson County Sheriff's Office in 2016, but it wasn't until 2018 that people started to question his actions.
Zachary Wester, whose father was a police officer, seemed destined for a successful career when he joined the Liberty County Sheriff's Office in 2015. However, within less than a year, he left Liberty County amid allegations of sexual misconduct. Despite these claims, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, located northwest of Tallahassee, hired him in 2016. At Jackson County, Wester quickly gained a reputation for his assertive and aggressive policing style. His high volume of drug arrests earned him recognition and respect within the department. Yet, as the summer of 2018 approached, investigators for the district attorney began to uncover troubling discrepancies in Wester's police reports and body camera footage. Zachary Wester's misconduct came to light when body camera footage revealed him holding a plastic baggie in his hand before searching a woman's vehicle, whom he later arrested for possession. This suspicious behavior prompted a thorough investigation into his actions. When investigators searched Wester's patrol vehicle, they uncovered ready-to-plant substances and paraphernalia in the trunk. Prosecutors argued that this evidence proved Wester had been carrying substances he used to plant on victims during traffic stops. The incriminating discovery led to Wester's suspension from duty in 2019. Later that year, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement completed its investigation, resulting in his arrest. Following his arrest, prosecutors were compelled to drop charges in over 100 cases involving Webster from his 2 years with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. One of the pivotal witnesses in Zachary Wester's trial was Teresa Odom, a victim of his misconduct. In 2018, Zachary stopped Teresa for a broken brake light and requested to search her truck. Despite her initial reluctance, Teresa consented to the search. To her shock, Zachary claimed to have found a bag of in her purse. Teresa adamantly denied having any drugs, but to avoid a protracted legal fight, she ultimately pleaded no contest and was sentenced to 4 years probation. Her conviction was later overturned once it was revealed that she was a victim of Zachary's deceitful practices. The defense tried to paint Zachary Wester as a dedicated family man and upstanding member of his community, emphasizing his regular church attendance and charitable contributions. His wife, Rebecca, begged for leniency, describing Zachary as a fundamentally good person who had simply made mistakes. Yet, the overwhelming evidence presented in court revealed that his actions were not just isolated errors, but part of a broader pattern of corruption. Zachary Wester was ultimately sentenced to 12 years in prison. The impact of his actions was profound, affecting numerous individuals and the community at large. In a measure of justice, the victims of Zachary's misconduct were awarded a $1 million settlement. This compensation seeks to address the harm and suffering caused by Wester's corruption, serving as a partial remedy for the extensive damage inflicted by his fraudulent conduct. In the next case, an off-duty Pentagon officer attempted heroism by killing 2 people.
Tonight, a former Pentagon police officer is facing more than 2 decades behind bars for a deadly double shooting in Montgomery County.
Meet David Dixon, a former Pentagon police officer who made headlines in April 2021. While off-duty and in the parking lot of his Maryland apartment complex, Dixon encountered a troubling scene. He reportedly saw 3 men attempting to break into a car. In response, Dixon drew his weapon and fired at the fleeing suspects. The incident resulted in the deaths of 32-year-old Dominique Williams and 38-year-old James Lionel Johnson as they tried to escape with the stolen vehicle. A third man, Michael Thomas, survived the shooting and became a key witness in the case. David Dixon claimed he had acted in self-defense, asserting that the burglars were driving towards him when he fired. However, video evidence contradicted this claim, showing that Dixon shot at the men after their car had already passed him, and there was no imminent threat to his life. Thomas highlighted that Dixon's decision to shoot was not a legitimate act of self-defense, but rather an attempt to prevent the theft of the vehicle. Dixon's attorney argued that he performed a heroic act by stopping the burglars from stealing the car. However, the surviving burglar, Michael Thomas, admitted to stealing the vehicle during a 911 call made after fleeing the scene. This incident was not an isolated example of Dixon's questionable use of force. In 2020, Dixon had previously pointed a rifle at a homeless woman who was wearing flip-flops in the lobby of his building. This pattern of behavior raised further concerns about his approach to using firearms and the implications for his actions as a police officer. Dixon was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his actions. Before being led away, he offered an apology in court, explaining that he had reacted instinctively based on his training, but expressed deep remorse for his actions. Despite his apology, the court's decision reflected the seriousness of his misconduct and the need for accountability in cases of excessive force. If what David Dixon did shocks you, wait until you hear about the brutal crimes that Wayne Couzens committed because he had a police belt and badge to aid him.
A wholly blameless victim of grotesquely executed crimes. Sarah Everard's final hours, said the judge, as bleak and agonizing as it's possible to imagine.
In the case of Wayne Couzens, the horrors that unfolded under the guise of his role as a police officer are truly chilling. Wayne Couzens, a Metropolitan Police officer, was arrested and faced grave allegations including kidnapping and murder. On March 3, 2021, in South London, England, 33-year-old Sarah Everard was abducted while walking home from a friend's house. Unbeknownst to her, she was being followed by a white car, leading to a series of events that would send shockwaves through the community and beyond. This car had been rented by Couzens from a dealership earlier that morning in Kent. Dashcam footage showed Couzens parking near Sarah and the two standing beside the car. In a harrowing turn of events, Couzens showed Sarah his police warrant card before handcuffing her, falsely claiming that he was arresting her for breaching COVID-19 guidelines. The next time the car was spotted, it was captured by CCTV around Kent. Later that night, it is believed that Cousins transferred Sarah to a different car in Shepherdswell and her there. After doing this, he strangled her with his police duty belt. The next sighting of Cousins showed him switching back to his rental car and driving to a gas station. There, he was seen purchasing gas, large builder's bags, and duct tape. It became apparent that Cousins had intended to dispose of Sarah's body. He burned her remains in a refrigerator and later dumped what was left of her in a pond located on a part of his family's property in Hodes Wood, Ashford. On March 8th, Cousins returned his handcuffs and police belt, claiming he was suffering from stress. The following day, he was arrested after being identified as the last person to have seen Sarah Everard. Sarah had called her boyfriend just before Cousins abducted her and murdered her. Her boyfriend promptly contacted the police, prompting a search that ultimately pinpointed Cousins as the primary suspect in her murder.
Show the picture. Do you know Sarah?
I don't know.
Okay.
For a time, Cousins vehemently denied any interaction with Sarah Everard, even when presented with a picture of her. Despite his insistence, the officers leading the investigation remained convinced of his guilt and continued to press him for answers. What Cousins eventually revealed under their relentless questioning was shocking and horrifying, further unraveling the depth of his crimes and the extent of his deception.
I am in financial and I've been lent on by, I don't know who they are. They're a group, a gang, whatever. And they told me, right, I need to go and pick up bills and give them to them.
Cousins offered a startling and convoluted explanation. He claimed that he had paid for sex in Folkestone and was subsequently threatened by a gang of Eastern Europeans. According to his story, the gang had demanded another girl as payment, citing a previous incident where Cousins had allegedly underpaid a sex worker. He asserted that this threat was the reason he had kidnapped Sarah Everard, to hand her over to the gang. However, Cousins provided no concrete details or answers about how the gang had contacted him, or how the situation had unfolded.
They threatened to take my family away from me. So, at that point, I'm doing what I can to protect my family.
On June 8, 2021, Wayne Cousins confessed to kidnapping and murdering Sarah Everard. In September, he was sentenced to life in prison with a whole life order, meaning he would never be released. Additionally, Cousins received an extra 19 months for a prior offense of indecent exposure. The judge who sentenced Cousins stated that Sarah Everard's murder could have been prevented if Cousins' previous sexual offenses had been taken more seriously. This damning observation highlighted systemic failures that allowed his pattern of violence to escalate unchecked. Cousins was said to be shaking as his sentence was read, but video evidence was never provided. As a result of this brutal murder, the Met announced that they would stop deploying lone police officers in plain clothing. Wayne Cousins' case was shocking, but nothing will make you lose faith in the law enforcement agencies faster than the horrific actions of Newman Raja that shook the law enforcement community.
Newman Khan Raja, defendant, verdict. We, the jury, find as follows. As to count one, we find a defendant guilty of manslaughter while armed with a firearm as charged in the information.
Newman Raja, a Pakistani-American who became a naturalized U.S. citizen in 2001, had long harbored ambitions of following in his grandfather's footsteps, who had served as a police chief in Pakistan. After working in a small Florida police department, Raja joined the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department in 2013. On October 18, 2015, Corey Jones, an employee of the Delray Beach Housing Authority, faced a troubling predicament. After a performance with his band, Corey's car broke down on Interstate 94. Desperate for help, he called his bandmate, who arrived with oil and tried to fix the issue. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to get the car running again. Corey called for a tow truck and saw his bandmate leave, believing he would be safe until help arrived. However, Corey's night was about to take a tragic turn. Newman Raja, working undercover in an unmarked white van with tinted windows, came upon Corey's broken-down vehicle. Raja was engaged in burglary surveillance at the time. He later claimed that Corey, who was reportedly armed, confronted him, forcing him to use his weapon. Newman fired 6 shots, hitting Corey with 3 of them. One bullet struck a major blood vessel near Corey's heart, causing fatal injuries. The other 2 bullets hit Corey in his left elbow and right shoulder, fracturing his arm. At the time of the shooting, Newman was not wearing a body camera, and his van lacked a dash cam, leaving critical details of the incident unrecorded. Internal affairs at the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department quickly launched an investigation into the shooting, leading to Newman Raja being placed on administrative leave and eventually terminated from his position. On June 1, 2016, a grand jury charged Newman with manslaughter and attempted first-degree murder with a firearm. The state attorney's office of Palm Beach County argued that Newman acted improperly by opening fire on Corey Jones without identifying himself as a police officer. They contended that Newman's actions were unjustified and directly resulted in Corey's death. Following his arrest, Newman was released on bond and placed under house arrest. His release came with conditions, including surrendering his passport and wearing an ankle monitor to track his movements. In March 2019, Newman Raja was found guilty of manslaughter and attempted first-degree murder after a week-long trial. The jury determined that Newman had recklessly caused Corey Jones's death and attempted to kill him with a firearm. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison in April 2019. Following the trial, Corey's family pursued a wrongful death lawsuit against the city of Palm Beach Gardens. They argued that the city's negligence allowed Newman to serve as a police officer despite his misconduct, contributing to Corey's death. In 2023, Corey's family and the city reached a $2 million settlement, providing some measure of justice for the loss they endured. Now we head to Australia, where a devoted cop who had associations with organized crime ring members.
There are people who believe that I'm the most corrupt, wicked, diabolical person in the world. I can never change their mind.
Roger Caleb Rogerson's story is a significant case of police corruption in Australia. During his tenure with the New South Wales Police Force, Rogerson was highly decorated, receiving 13 awards for his service, bravery, and performance. However, his reputation took a dramatic turn when his criminal activities were revealed, leading to his dismissal from the force in 1986. Rogerson's actions and the subsequent uncovering of his crimes made headlines for years, marking him as one of the most notorious figures in Australian law enforcement history. His case serves as a stark reminder of how corruption can undermine even the most respected institutions. The first indicator of something going on was Rogers' association with other corrupt cops and organized crime ring members, including a substance dealer and convicted substance dealer named Arthur Neddy Smith. Roger Rogerson's involvement in high-profile cases like the Toe Cutter Gang murder and the Whiskey A Go-Go fire initially bolstered his reputation. However, his descent into criminal behavior began to surface in 1981 with the shooting of Warren LaFranchi, a substance dealer. Smith's later claims that Rogerson had given him permission to commit multiple murders further tarnished Rogerson's legacy, highlighting the severe breaches of trust and corruption within the police force. The situation around Warren LaFranchi's death became even murkier with claims that he had shot at a police officer during the incident. The case took a darker turn when a woman who had testified against Rogerson was later found murdered in a pond in Centennial Park.
Rogerson shooting dead 3 people in the line of duty, including drug dealer Warren LaFranchi in a Chippendale laneway in 1981.
I said, this bloke's going to shoot me. I knew he was going to pull the trigger, so I've fired twice, and he's fallen over and he's landed in the gutter.
Despite the mounting accusations and evidence against him, Rogerson remained on the police force and was never charged for the shooting of Warren LaFranchi. The situation escalated when, in 1984, Rogerson was allegedly involved in the shooting of fellow officer Michael Drury. Michael, who survived the attack, testified against Rogerson, claiming that he had refused a bribe to tamper with evidence in a case involving a convicted dealer working with Christopher Flannery, an associate of Rogerson. Alan Williams, the dealer in question, testified that Rogerson and Flannery had conspired to kill Drury, offering $50,000 each for the job. Despite these serious allegations and testimony, the charges were eventually dropped in 1989, leading to Rogerson's acquittal. Roger Rogerson's legal troubles continued despite multiple allegations and evidence against him. After being convicted of substance dealing and conspiring with dealer Dennis Allen, the appeal against these charges was dropped and Rogerson walked free. In November 1989, despite the charges being dropped, Rogerson was dismissed from active service duty to the Drury case. He was subsequently arrested in 1990 and sentenced to 9 months in prison for fabricating evidence. Rogerson's legal issues persisted, and in 2005, he and his wife, Anne Malocco, were arrested for perjury after lying to the Police Integrity Commission. Rogerson was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison, but was released after serving 12 months due to good behavior.
Mr. Rogerson is being taken from the steps of his family home now. Mr. Rogerson, do you maintain your innocence?
Absolutely.
Do you maintain your innocence, sir?
We're back to the Gestapo days now.
The last trial Rogerson faced was related to the murder of Jamie Gow, a 20-year-old student in 2014. The incident reportedly occurred after a drug deal involving Rogerson and former cop Glenn McNamara went awry. In March 2015, Rogerson and McNamara were charged with the murder of Jamie and the supply of nearly 3 kilograms of methamphetamine. The trial, however, was aborted the following day due to revelations of Rogerson's alleged involvement in multiple murders during his time in active service. Rogerson's final trial, which began in February 2016, culminated with his sentencing to life in prison on September 2, 2016, for the murder of Jamie Gow. Despite attempts to appeal the sentence in 2020, Rogerson's appeal was denied, and he continued to serve his life sentence until 2024. On January 18, 2024, Rogerson suffered an aneurysm and was rushed to the hospital. He passed away on January 21st after being taken off life support. He was 83 years old. An investigation was launched into his death due to standard protocols for deaths occurring in police custody. Rogerson's notorious career and criminal activities were so well known that his story was dramatized in a miniseries broadcast in 1995. After witnessing the corruption of these dirty cops, you won't want to miss our next video.